Hello, and welcome to our webcast for December 13, 2019. My name is Christian Debré, and this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet. Hello. Also joining us, Taylor Hyatt, our policy analysis and outreach coordinator.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Taylor. Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. We believe that the choice to die is not free as long as old, ill, and disabled people don't have a free choice in where and how they live, and that must change. Today's topics 2019 year in review. So, Amy Asbrook will speak about that in a few seconds.
I will do that. I will do my best anyway. I'm going to magnify this a little bit for myself. Okay. So it's hard to believe that December is almost half over, and that means it's time to review the important events from 2019. People keep saying it's the end of the decade. No, the end of the decade is next year. In January and February, we looked at the Council of Canadian Academies reports, including an overview and one webcast each for the three reports. We called the series Something About Us Without Us because people with disabilities were not included in the working group that drafted the reports, resulting in a flawed understanding of the role of disability discrimination in encouraging assisted suicide and euthanasia.
So this is bizarre. You do something about somebody and you don't talk with this somebody.
Right.
Wow.
But that's very typical of what happens to disabled people. The report on euthanasia for people with dementia via advanced request included several disturbing assumptions, including the idea that death is preferable to life with dementia or other severe disability, or to using a feeding tube. We also pointed out errors that led us to disagree with one of the report's conclusions that advanced directives have, quote, occasionally positive, mostly equivocal, and no negative effects on patient outcome.
Right. Even the average non-disabled person is told to be careful, excuse me, when writing up documents outlining future wishes for their care. Why would they not start from the same place of caution here? The cynic in me says we know darn well why. Add disability prejudice to this whole equation, and you have to be 10 times more careful that you trust the person you name to make decisions on your behalf and have an accurate picture of your life.
And trust the hospitals that you wrote down. Okay, so the report on mature minors ignored two important problems that would have a great impact on expanding eligibility for assisted suicide and euthanasia to adolescents. First, suicide and risky behavior among teenagers. Minor problem. Minor problem. And abuse and mercy killing of disabled. Yeah, and in fact, we pointed out in the report that they completely ignored not only the killing, the murder of Tracy Latimer, but also the suicide or assisted suicide of Jericho Bowler. They just kind of skipped over that. Not important.
Don't look at it.
Yeah. Nor did the report take into account the combined effect of barriers to decision making for disabled youth, such as dependence on loved ones for personal care, the impact of negative views of disability on self-esteem, isolation, painful and invasive medical procedures, peer pressure and bullying, and the usual problems of adolescents, which are plenty.
Yeah, adolescents don't have a problem. When they lose their first
Oh dear.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Right. Where was I? I don't want anyone to read this list and come away with the impression that life as a disabled person is all doom and gloom at any age. But living in a society with barriers like these requires conscious and intentional work to either work around them or remove them. And as a young person, you might not have the internal or external resources to do that.
Right, exactly. Especially if your parents are the ones that
Yeah.
are giving you grief, think your life isn't valuable. Mm-hmm. Finally, the working group studying assisted suicide and euthanasia for people with mental disorders ignored the impact of mental illness on people with disabilities because the committee's mandate was limited to people whose only reason for the euthanasia request was a mental disorder. So they talked about mental disorders in women, indigenous people, veterans, blah, blah, blah. Everybody but people with disabilities. It was bizarre. Nor did the working group challenge the Better Dead Than Disabled foundation of the assisted suicide and euthanasia law, where some suicides will be prevented while others will be made possible by euthanasia. The report discounts real problems like inadequate access to palliative care and being forced into an institution as the cause of hopelessness and despair. Well, that was it for the CCA reports. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of People with Disabilities, Ms. Catalina Demandas Aguiar, visited Canada in April to gather firsthand information about the status of people with disabilities, to determine whether disability rights were being respected, and to make suggestions to improve compliance with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the CRPD. She was, quote, extremely concerned, unquote, that disabled Canadians have been pressured to seek medical assistance in dying and don't have viable alternatives. In a May webcast, we provided details from Health Canada's fourth interim report on the federal MAID law. The average number of deaths per month increased from 85 per month during the first reporting period to 261 deaths per month during the fourth interim reporting period.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. The total number of people
But that's the truth.
who had received MAID as of October 31st, 2018 was 6,749, excluding the territories and euthanasia in Quebec after March 31st of 2018. And as we will see, there was another 1,300 people. We posted on our blog regarding the death of Vincent Lambert in July after the removal of his feeding tube. Like Terry Schiavo, Mr. Lambert's parents and spouse disagreed about whether he would want to live with a severe brain injury requiring constant support. This summer, we also launched a data collection project to prepare for the 5-year review of Canada's euthanasia program and to
Data collection.
Yeah.
Okay, you made a law and you don't look at it, so you could not know what happened with this law. If it's good or not, you doesn't have any idea.
Well, they do have, as I was about to say, that it try to capture information we believe will be missing from Health Canada's monitoring system.
Yeah, they missed so much information. It's unbelievable.
Right.
You could not administrate any law without information, and they made sure they will not get it.
Right, and it's not just us who said this. There was an article written by a woman named Adele Furry, who used to work for Stats Canada, who wrote a piece for the Vulnerable Persons Standard website, and she talks about how the monitoring program isn't going to collect the information that's necessary. The project is meant to track social and economic pressures that cause people to request assisted suicide and euthanasia, the deaths of ineligible people, and non-respect of safeguards. So we talked about that last summer, and there's a link. This year, the disability rights movement lost several activists, artists, and leaders who will be sorely missed. Yeah. They include Carrie Ann Lucas, Catherine Araniello, Denise Cruz, Bob Liston, Bill Peace, Carmela Hutchison, and Marka Bristow. Both Carrie Ann Lucas and Bill Peace died due to complications of cost-saving treatment decisions.
Yeah. And kind of low cost, because when they die, the cost of caring for them to their death was a lot more than what they've been refused for.
Right. Yeah.
It's unbelievable either.
Yeah. We highlighted several individual cases of problems with assisted suicide and euthanasia this year. In August, we reported the death of Sean Taggart, a man with ALS who needed 24-hour support to live independently. British Columbia Health Care authorities would only cover 20 hours per day of personal assistance, instead offering to place him in a nursing home far from his 10-year-old son. Mr. Taggart believed death was preferable to the limitations of institutional life, and when his efforts to advocate for the needed coverage failed, he died by euthanasia.
Yeah, the nursing home that he was offered was something like 4-hour driving.
4.5 hours, yep.
Something like that. You could not do it. You have only one son, and you could not see him because you are 4-hour drive away from him.
Yeah.
And this is the only people that you could collect on.
Yeah.
Ah, unbelievable either.
And they talk about choice, right?
Yeah, choice. That's a choice.
In September, the family of Alan Nichols went public with his story. Mr. Nichols was hospitalized after some personal setbacks caused him to become suicidal. While in hospital, he made a request for euthanasia that was approved, and he died in July of this year. Mr. Nichols' family is trying to learn how Alan, who did not have a grievous and irremediable medical condition in an advanced state of irreversible decline, whose natural death was not reasonably foreseeable, but who did have a history of untreated depression, could be determined eligible for euthanasia.
So, to protection, just jumped, right? Like that. It's a murder.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, then in November, we examined 3 case histories of potential problems with the practice of MAID, presented by Toronto Dr. David D'Souza at a conference in Ottawa. One person without a confirmed diagnosis was nevertheless deemed eligible and was euthanized, while a second was not euthanized because she was unable to consent to the procedure. A third person was persuaded to use palliative care rather than euthanasia after refusing treatment for his chronic condition.
Wow, a success. They are.
Taylor?
Our recent conversation with Alan Nichols' family and the stories that Dr. D'Souza has told both touched on the same thing. Lack of accountability in making sure the law and all the related eligibility standards are followed. If you missed last week's episode, I highly recommend watching it.
Yeah. On September 11th, geez, a lot of bad things happened on September 11th. Salvador Allende. He was the Chilean president who was over
and killed.
Yes.
By CIA.
By the CIA, yes. A Quebec Superior Court ruled in a case brought by 2 disabled people who challenged the federal medical assistance in dying law's eligibility requirement that natural death must be reasonably foreseeable, and the provincial law's mandate that the person be at the end of life. Okay? The judge in the Truchon case struck down the challenged sections, saying they violated the plaintiff's rights. She said that the legislative objectives of not perpetuating negative views of disability and of preventing suicides were too vague to justify.
I can an argument because advocates say all the time, MAID and suicide are two separate things. But I don't get the first one. It's hard to track perpetuating a negative view of disability on a large scale because that kind of thing could be done in ways that look small, mundane, insignificant. And besides that, one could argue that suicidality should be handled on an individual level.
Yeah, except for the idea is that these are legislative goals. And to say that preventing suicide as a legislative goal is too vague, that seems a little off to me. But hey, what am I? Chopped liver? Okay. Also in mid-September, the Lamb case in Britain.
I think we are.
Chopped liver, yes. Was adjourned on request of the plaintiff's attorney.
Yes.
Mr. Harvey cited an affidavit submitted by cancer psychiatrist Dr. Madeline Lee on behalf of the Attorney General, stating that Ms. Lamb's death would probably be considered, quote, reasonably foreseeable under current standards of practice of MAID providers. And we examined Dr. Lee's report in depth in October, and there are links. There are always links. Go ahead, Taylor.
I love how they mentioned current standards of practice, as if they assume that the practice should always be separate from the legal standard. Most people would probably be shocked to find that those two things don't match.
Well, in fact, the legal standard is what was provided in AB decision out of Ontario Superior Court in 2017 that we reported on, and there's a link on our website. But yeah, the practice standards have just gotten pretty lax. Okay, the Truchon Court gave Parliament and Quebec's National Assembly 6 months to modify the statute to comply with the ruling. Despite efforts by disability rights activists and others during the election campaign, the federal and provincial attorneys general opted not to appeal the decision.
Yeah, that's a bad decision because even just to be clear about that thing, they should have put a pin on it.
Yeah.
But unbelievable to take a decision like that.
Yeah, it really it did two things. One is it left some really rotten encased in the law, and it also foreclosed. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
The Commission on End-of-Life Care in Quebec has released 4 annual reports and a summary report since euthanasia began in December of 2015 in that province. In April, we highlighted the Commission's summary report, and in November, we discussed the latest annual report, which provides statistics on euthanasia and continuous palliative sedation. Here are some highlights. Between April 1st, 2018 and March 31st of 2019, 1,331 people were euthanized, while 1,243 people received continuous palliative sedation. Euthanasia and CPS each accounted for 1.9% of the deaths in Quebec during the 2018 to 19 period, for a total of nearly 4% of all deaths in the province.
And be sure both are euthanasia, because CPS is just a matter of time. That's it.
Yeah.
But there's no protection on it.
Right. Anybody can get it. No
Suicide for everybody.
No eligibility requirements, no safeguards, nada.
No, nothing.
A total of 2,909 euthanasias have been reported since December of 2015, while 2,947 continuous palliative sedations have been tallied. The commission recorded 15 euthanasia of people who were not eligible. In 64 additional cases, the commission found that safeguards were not respected. And that includes a couple of cases where the doctor met the person for the first time on the day of the euthanasia.
So, add the two things, 79 people who may or may not want to die really.
Right. And certainly the safeguards were not respected.
100% sure.
Of the declaration forms submitted to the commission, 84 came in more than 6 months after euthanasia was provided, and they're supposed to be delivered 10 days, within 10 days. 6 months, 10 days, oh, same thing.
And some was not received at all.
Yeah.
You are
The commission had to pursue doctors to get 60 euthanasia declaration forms in order to produce its summary report. So they had to keep writing and calling and writing to get the doctors to hand in their reports. These are the ones they knew about, of course. 11 declarations were never produced. So they knew in 11 cases that a euthanasia had been done, but the doctor never produced the report.
Interesting.
Okay, the summary report also mentions, quote unquote, around 20 euthanasia that were not reported by doctors or facilities.
Not at all.
But which came to light following audits by institutions, and the euthanasia were identified through the pharmacy records.
Okay, that's a safety that Quebec keep in surplus that other provinces in Canada. This is the only province that you could do a match somewhere to count those things.
Right. Because the institutions are supposed to report the euthanasia, they did audits and found these euthanasias in the pharmacy record. But if they hadn't found those euthanasia in the pharmacy records, there would have been 20 people that, nope, we didn't know. And God only knows about other.
So that since
euthanasia.
31 death, there is no report, there's no nothing.
Right.
There's no knowledge.
Right.
People was just killed. That's it.
Right. And yet we're supposed to trust this. Okay. The average time between signing the request and administration of euthanasia was 12 days. And 40% of euthanasia occurred within 10 days of the request. So people who keep saying, oh, it's too slow.
Oh, so too slow, but half of euthanasia was taken care within 12 days of the death.
Yeah.
And 40% 10 days or less.
Yeah.
And there is 10 days of thinking.
There's supposed to be a 10-day reflection period.
Yeah. Except in emergency. So 40% of that are emergency, maybe. Okay?
Maybe.
But what happened to the 10% between 12 and 10 days?
Yeah.
Oh, something fishy on that.
Yeah. Finally, on December 6th, we held a special edition of the webcast, inviting people from across Canada to discuss how the euthanasia law is failing people with disabilities, political and legal options for changing the law, and to begin to build a network of support. Participants included Gary Nichols, who's the brother of Alan Nichols, Alex Schottenberg of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, Dr. Heidi Jans, chair of CCD's Ending of Life Ethics Committee, and an independent living advocate, Jonathan Marshall. All of our webcasts and blog posts are available on our website, though some videos are missing, like the one from the French webcast today, because it was
the French side today.
Due to technical problems with the transition to YouTube's new video streaming platform, which is a pain in the neck. We will return on January 17th of 2020 with news and information on end of life and disability issues. In the meantime, we wish you a joyous and peaceful holiday season.
Yes.
So
Take care.
if you want more information about the topics that we discuss here, you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours not dead yet, all one word. Visit our website at tvndy.ca. You can email us at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks to Christina for helping out, and
Thank you,
thanks to
Amy.
Taylor as
Thank
well.
you, Taylor.
We will see you next year.
See you next year.
Take care.
Bye.